I want to make a few points about coverage of the 2020 census by journalists, many of whom will be new to this issue. First, journalists are not advocates, and many mainstream journalists will not be getting out there with a message that you should fill out your census form. But journalists are very good at explaining things, and I think that one of their roles will be to talk about how important the census is to their communities in terms of funding and in terms of completely counting and getting a full picture of the population for political representation purposes. Journalists also will be important to keep track of how well the census is doing in terms of meeting its goals to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. In terms of stories that journalists can do, the 2020 census offers a lot of meaty ideas. Every census operation, from collecting the address list to publishing the data, has at least 3 components that can be mined for good stories. The first one, and I'll give you an example via an actual census operation, is describing the operation itself. So, for example, non-response follow-up, the phase where the Census Bureau goes knocking on the doors of the people who didn't respond to the initial mail-out. But another great story is to use some of the statistics that the Census Bureau itself produces about how well it's doing to assess how well the census is going. So one of those statistics will be, what's the response rate? What's the share of households that are answering the census forms? And how many of those whose doors are knocked on are responding to census enumerators? And then the third component of every census operation that makes for a good story is perhaps the most important, which is using that operation to shed light on a larger issue in a community or in American society at large. So when we talk about people not responding to the census and the Census Bureau coming out to knock on their door, one issue that raises is, why are Americans increasingly reluctant to answer surveys? Why don't they trust their government or trust survey takers? And why, especially among certain groups that are prone to being undercounted, why are they especially reluctant to answer, or why are they hard to find? So this 2020 census really offers a lot for journalists at the community, state, and national level to write not just about the census itself and the act of census taking, but also about what the 2020 census and the data it will produce says about America today.
Hello, I'm Al Fontenot. I am the Associate Director of the United States Census, in charge of the 2020 decennial census programs. There are several key points I would like to make sure you take away from this session. Number one, there are 3 ways to respond to the 2020 census, making it the easiest census that we've had ever. You can respond online, you can respond on the telephone, or you can respond using a paper questionnaire. Responding online is fast, easy, and safe, but if you're adverse to responding online, please call one of our telephone questionnaire assistance centers and they can take your interview right over the phone. If you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way with paper and pencil and mail it back to us, you'll have an opportunity to do that. Everyone gets an opportunity to respond the way that they choose. The second point I'd like you to take away is that census offices are merely administrative centers where we manage the data. The fact that we have 248 census offices in 2020 rather than 494 census offices in 2010 does not mean that we have a diminished presence or diminished interviewing capability in the local community. We had 494 presences in 2010 because we needed to move paper questionnaires, paper payroll, and paper information back and forth from the field to the office on a daily basis. In 2020, all that information is being transmitted electronically. Case assignments being transmitted electronically to the handheld computer of the enumerator. Payroll information being transmitted from the enumerator to the office. Completed casework being transmitted in an encrypted form from the handheld computer with the enumerator back to the Census Bureau. We don't need to have the physical proximity to be effective in managing and enumerating our communities. Thank you very much.
My name is Burton Rice. I'm the Assistant Director for Communications, and I've served many functions in this decade. I started the decade as the Chief of the 2020 Research and Planning Office. Our work on the 2020 census began right after the 2010 census. We started in 2011, 12, 13, developing our design for the census, and we developed our design around 4 innovation areas. We looked at re-engineering our address canvassing work, which is the address list development, and bringing data and technology to bear on that. We looked at the development of our internet self-response and giving people 3 options to respond to the census via their internet, the telephone, or by returning a paper questionnaire. And importantly, anybody who chooses to can return a paper questionnaire. We looked hard at administrative records where we could use data people provide to the government, have provided already through their tax returns and the Social Security Administration, Medicare, Medicaid. We actually look at multiple sources of data that we can use to bring efficiencies to our non-response follow-up operation. And we also looked at how we could leverage technology to bring efficiencies to our field operations. All of that was mapped out through the early years of the census planning and development process. We then embarked on a testing regimen. We conducted 13 tests for this census, which is unprecedented. That culminated with the 18 end-to-end census test, where we tested and proved in all of the key operations and systems necessary to conduct a census, and that test was very successful. 10 years ago at this stage, we were still planning our census because of failures in the technology we were using in 2009. We didn't have any experience like that this time around. Our systems proved ineffectively. We're now scaling them up. Our operational innovations function smoothly, and we are ready for the 2020 census. The stakes for the census are high. Over $675 billion are released every year using census data. Those are federal dollars. We also apportion members among the states, and census data are used to draw legislative districts. Congress is a huge stakeholder for the census. Every member is concerned about a solid count in their district. But mayors are concerned about the census too. We have mayors all over the country who are concerned as the census data comes out for their municipality, accuracy is critical for them because they reach certain thresholds, they apply for increased federal funding. So that drives the census as well. And of course, advocacy organizations that represent different population groups are concerned and focused on the census as well.
The Census Bureau is mounting a massive advertising and communications program to motivate all people living within the United States to respond to the census in 2020. The Census Bureau has a massive integrated communications program that includes advertising, public relations, events, statistics in schools, and partnerships. The goal of this program is to reach every single person living in the United States to talk to them about the importance of the census and why they should participate. But it's also to underscore the impact that it's safe and secure to participate. The 2020 census will be the first online census in U.S. history. One of the key components of the 2020 Census Communications Program is partnerships, both at the national and at the local level. Partnerships helps us achieve a level of trust within the community by working with those community organizations and businesses that are trusted by local members of those communities. The research we conducted as part of the Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators study was a representative sample of 50,000 nationwide. We also conducted 42 qualitative focus groups to explore what those barriers and motivators might be among the different groups that we held the focus groups in. The 2020 census will be the largest mobilization in the federal government, particularly from a communications point of view. We have to reach every single person living within the United States to convey the message that the census is easy, important, and safe. And we do that through a variety of ways. We have a $500 million campaign geared at trying to increase awareness about the census and also motivate people to respond when it comes to their house in March of 2020. The more households that we get to self-respond to the census, the more accurate it will be, and we also save a lot of taxpayer money from non-response follow-up costs later down in the operations. The advertising campaign is being managed by Y&R with a group of multicultural agencies geared towards communicating to different race and ethnic population groups across the country. The advertising program will be in 13 languages, including English. The Census Bureau has local resources for you to use as you try to cover the 2020 census. By contacting your local Census Bureau representative, you can learn about current operations and also anything else going on in your community that relates to the 2020 census. Many communities have started founding complete count committees. These are organizations that come together that represent the local community to try to increase awareness about the census and why everyone should participate. For more information about the 2020 census, please go to 2020census.gov. There you'll find a lot of media resources as well as other pertinent information that can help you as you generate stories for the national head count that takes place once every 10 years. Thank you.
My name is Margot Anderson. I'm a social historian and I write about the history of the census. I'm following up on some of the presentations that we did yesterday on the role of the census in American history. And then I talked about the fact that the history is embedded in the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, that mandates that representation and direct taxation shall be apportioned among the states, quote, according to their respective numbers. And because of that, the United States has taken a census of its population every decade since 1790, and in 2020 will be the 24th decennial census. The census, I've argued, is very important because it shifts power from one part of the country to the other as population growth and change, and because also the United States has a very dynamic and diverse population compared to the rest of the world. So the census is something you might call a rare and repeated and hopefully a relatively unobtrusive part of our political system. It's rare. We do it only once every 10 years as opposed to our congressional elections or presidential elections, which occur much more frequently. It's repeated. As I said, we've done it every 10 years successfully since 1790. And it is what I call unobtrusive or invisible to people because it comes around and the Census Bureau will ask us all by household to fill out a form either on the internet or by phone or by mail or in person next April 2020. And then the census from the household's perspective sort of goes away for 10 years, and the Census Bureau takes that data, reports it by the end of 2020 to the President and Congress that will then shift seats in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College based on the numbers. They will also use that to send more detailed information to help states redistrict their congressional seats, state legislators, all the way down to school boards, and we will use those numbers also to allocate funding from the federal government through for various programs for the next 10 years as the baseline for it. So it's an important element of the American political system. Yesterday, I'm going to segue quickly. Yesterday, I was asked about Secretary Ross's mandate to put a question on citizenship on the American population, all of the entire American population on the 2020 census form. We know that that has caused much controversy, and there is litigation challenging that decision in various stages, including moving toward the Supreme Court after a decision by a judge in New York. The question has, as a historian, the question has appeared on the census, but it has never technically been asked of the entire American population in the form that the Secretary has proposed. In previous censuses, the question was asked only of the foreign-born. So you were asked, for example, where were you born? And if you were born in the United States, you, of course, are a natural-born citizen. For those people who were born outside the United States, then they would get a second question saying, are you a citizen? Have you tried to become a citizen, or are you still an alien? And that was the form of the question through what they call the complete count era, when everybody in the country got the same census form. In in the last 50 years, we've separated a lot of the detailed questions into a sample, and so only a sample of the population gets the detailed question, and that question on citizenship moved to the sample in 1970 and in 1990 again. It did ask everybody on the sample, are you a citizen of the United States? But it didn't ask the roughly 83 or 85% of the population that weren't in the sample. So what we're going to do in 2020, if this continues, is ask a new type of question. And we talked about that in the Q&A yesterday afternoon. The final thing I'm going to mention is that there's a question of, well, gee, is this mandatory? Do I have to fill out my census form? Or does somebody in my household have to, more technically? And the answer is that Congress debated this question when they wrote the first statute for the census in 1790 and decided, yep, everybody has to fill out, every household has to report in the census, and mandated that the household had originally be the person that had to do that, and if they don't, they were to be fined. This was mostly a provision to emphasize how important this piece of the American political structure is. It has been very rarely enforced. There are in the statute fines for non-compliance, but the Census Bureau does not want to implement those. It's not a enforcement agency. And the cases where we actually have historical evidence of people being fined for not filling out the census usually are what we would call test cases. And the best one that I will use right now is in 1960, the famous pilot Eddie Rickenbacker said he wouldn't fill out the census form. He was charged and fined. He took the case to court, and the courts actually decided against his non-compliance. And since then, there have not been any high-profile cases that have gone into the federal courts and by prominent people not responding to the census. So that's my 3 minutes of fame, and if you have any other questions, do let me know. Thank you.